Fairy Tail 100 Quest anime is out, and man, have I wanted to talk about so many things about 100 Years Quest that I've been putting off for the anime's release, and Diablos is one of them. Wizard Guilds are something that I myself have been wanting to just make a full video on in general here on the channel, but Diablos is one I've wanted to talk about as it is probably one of my favorite Wizard Guilds that was introduced in Fairy Tail, and a really cool aspect that was introduced within 100 Years Quest. And by the time this video was out, it should be around the time when Diablos makes their official appearance into the anime, as I've been waiting to see these guys animated for years, just like other Fairy Tail fans, and this is my perfect excuse to just talk about Diablos in general. Before we start talking about this new Wizard Guild, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell for updates on future videos. Really helps, and it shows you guys enjoy the content I make here on the channel and shows you want to see more. There are so many other Wizard Guilds that I will make dedicated videos of, including the Fairy Tail Guild itself, obviously, but Diablos at the moment takes precedence. So without further ado, let's jump right into the video. Now, the Diablos Guild is located within the continent of Giltino, which is the main continent where the 100 Years Quest series is taking place in. And what makes Diablos incredibly interesting is that despite the appearance of a lot of the characters and some of their actions, Diablos is a legal guild. They are not a dark guild, which is what we'll most likely be led to believe at the start of 100 Years Quest until it's elaborated on down the road. But what makes Diablos incredibly interesting is that they're not just made up of any group of wizards. No, they're primarily made up of dragon slayers. And to be more specific, they're newly discovered 5th generation dragon slayers. That's right, 5th generation. Now, I briefly go over the 5th generation Dragon Slayers in my Dragon Slayers Explained video, but I'll go over them again here as this is incredibly important as the guild is primarily created out of 5th generation Dragon Slayers. Now, 5th generation Dragon Slayers are completely different from the previous generations of Dragon Slayers on how they gain their abilities. And their main difference is that they gain their abilities by eating dragon flesh. That's right, they don't learn it from dragons or from a book or have Dragon Slayer Lacrima implanted in them. No, they become Dragon Slayers by devouring dragon meat, which is an already incredibly interesting thing within the world of Fairy Tail. This didn't even come across my mind or many other readers, and the revelation of this is already incredible as it adds a whole new layer to Dragon Slayers as well. Now, the 5th generation Dragon Slayers obviously gain the powers of the dragons that they do devour, however seemingly they don't get the side effects of dragonification or extreme vertigo aka motion sickness that 1st generation Dragon Slayers tend to have, same with 3rd generation. But there is one clear-cut drawback for 5th generation Dragon Slayers, and that is they can't go into Dragon Force. Now I'd be asking, why can't they go into Dragon Force? Other Dragon Slayers have been able to do this, why not the 5th generation? Well, it's very simple. Because, you know how I said that they don't do dragonification as a drawback? Well, that's not entirely true. That is primarily the drawback if one uses Dragon Slayer magic for a long period of time, as that causes a dragon seed to sprout within them and turn the Slayer into an actual dragon. But for 5th generation Dragon Slayers, it's a little different, as they can go their whole lives without dragonification. However, once they use Dragon Force, which many 5th generation Dragon Slayers can actually perform relatively easily, staying in that form for too long will end up causing them to undergo an incredibly hyper-paced dragonification, increasing their muscles, changing their hair color, and just transforming them into a full-on dragon as time progresses. It's a rapid acceleration of dragonification, and thus it'll end up causing them to not only gain strength, but they'll go berserk, lose complete control of their actions, and lash out at anything around them. This was shown by the Dragon Slayer Nibaru in the Alderone arc, as he did use Dragon Force against Wendy, and he started to go completely berserk. So in terms of 5th generation Dragon Slayers, that is the main taboo of the guild. No Dragon Force, because once you activate it, there's a strong chance that you will just instantly dragonifize once you end up using Dragon Force. So that is the biggest drawback for Dragon Slayers within the 5th generation. Before I get into the actual history of Diablos, let me just talk about the guild hall itself, because the design for the guild hall is incredibly badass and also very menacing. Now, the exact location of the guild hall is just unknown, we don't know where it is, but we at least know what it looks like. Now, Baseline appearance, to an extent, it looks like your standard issue guild hall, but it is a bit run down seemingly, with a bunch of dead trees in the area and skulls with candles lit towards the front entrance, with a giant insect-looking monster on top of the guild hall with massive wings as well. But one of them does seem to be relatively broken. Obviously going into the whole thing of Diablos' guild not having the best in terms of care. Now, as I previously mentioned, Diablos is primarily consistent of Dragon Slayers. With the fact that they're a Dragon Slayer guild, their main mission objective is to actually hunt down and devour dragons so that they can devour them and gain their latent powers for themselves. Now, what's interesting is that a lot of the times for Diablos, slaying dragons can be a rite of passage in order to enter the guild. If you want to enter the Diablos guild, you have to devour a dragon and become a dragon slayer. Now, either you have to somehow find a way to kill a dragon yourself, or, which is the most likely option, enlist the help of another dragon slayer in that guild to help slay the dragon. And what makes this infinitely more interesting is that Giltina actually has a couple of dragons hidden throughout the entire continent due to the fact of Diablos' own existence and the fact that the dragon slayers gain their powers by eating dragon meat, which makes the Dragon Slayers of Giltina more qualified to be Dragon Slayers than the majority of the Dragon Slayers that we have in Ishgard, save for Natsu right now, which is already incredibly impressive and showcases their own powers as they can actually slay dragons. Now, dragon hunting is obviously their main form of jobs to take. Since they are a guild in Giltina, they will take other jobs, but the ones that they focus on and prioritize are the dragon hunting quests, which does make them a more specialized guild in terms of wizard guilds. I'll go over masters of the guild when I get into the actual members a little bit later on in this video, but I will note that there are two masters of Diablos that are known to us and that we see within the story, so I'll go over those later. But we do have to know the initial master of Diablos, and that is George Raisin, or Raisin. George Raisin sounds better. Now, it's not fully stated how long ago it's been since Diablos was created. However, we do know that the founder was the guild master George Raisin, and he was most likely stated to be one of the first dragon eaters that we know of. And what makes George interesting is that he creates Diablos right as many people flock to him and he ends up making into dragon eaters. And that's how he created the Diablos guild, because George actually undergone the 100 Years quest under Elefsir one time. And the formation of the guild happened in the middle of this 100 Years quest that George was undertaking to try and seal the dragon gods for Elefsir. However, the 100 Years quest is incredibly special as it primarily has a written oath that the takers of the 100 Years quest cannot disclose information about what the main objective of the 100 Years quest is, the targets of the 100 Years quest, and the conditions for it. And with George flocking people towards him, creating a guild of other dragon eaters to help him in the 100 Years quest, he broke this written oath for the 100 Years quest, essentially making the initial agreement with Diablos to basically take on the 100 Years quest null and void, which basically makes Elefsir forced to send this request to other wizard guilds instead. But this doesn't stop George from continuing to try and do the 100 Years quest himself, even though it's not officially. He sends out members of his guild when it seems fit, whenever they find leads on like the dragon gods or other dragons. When it comes to the dragon gods, they'll go off, follow leads, and try to fight and slay the dragon gods in order to fulfill the dragon hunting quota of Diablos and devour the dragon gods' power for themselves, which is what makes them the primary antagonistic force against Fairy Tail outside of the dragon gods and gets in their way throughout 100 Years quest up to a certain point. But the interesting thing about George in particular is that he's not exactly the most, righteous person, nicest person. He's kind of rude. He's got a very bad mouth and, he's not exactly the best person on earth. But despite George's whole personality, Diablos is the #1 magic guild in Giltina. They have an upstanding history as one of their best legal guilds, which means that they are getting a ton of quests outside of their usual dragon hunting stuff. So it showcases that Giltina, as the continent itself, trusts Diablos to undertake their quests, despite the questionable nature of their guildmaster, which is already incredibly interesting in and of itself. And as we explore Diablos more, the main characters of the guild aren't exactly the worst people on Earth. They got interesting personalities, or just sometimes can be kind of sadistic. A lot of times it's just mainly from the influence of George himself and the environment he's created within Diablos. No one really has that much of an issue with them, and it doesn't seem like they cause any real problems to inconvenience other people on the continent, thus giving them a relatively good and clean history for the most part. Now, any wizard guild worth their salt is nothing without its members, and Diablos has a very good amount of them. As at this point in 100 Years Quest, there are actually 11 members of Diablos that we know of, 2 of them being their guild masters. Now, we already know based off of the anime 3 members of Diablos, which is Kyria, Madmal, and Scullion, otherwise known as the Corpse Dragon Slayer, the Blade Dragon Slayer, and the Armor Dragon Slayer. And these are the main antagonists that we end up coming across in 100 Years Quest for the Mercphobia and the Alderone arcs. But after that, we get introduced to more members of Diablos with their own unique personalities, cool designs, and really interesting abilities. However, this does go far into manga spoilers, as the rest of these characters aren't going to be introduced until Season 2 of 100 Years Quest, so we don't want to get spoiled for all the members if you're anime only up to this point when the video initially drops, and you don't want to be spoiled. Well, it's been nice talking to you guys, great to have you along the way, and I hope you all have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video. As for anyone that just wants a refresher for Diablos, or if you don't mind spoilers, let's get into the rest of the members. Now, I already mentioned George Ryzen as the guildmaster and founder of Diablos, and he is the 4-beast Dragon Slayer. Now, we have no idea what this is, as we have not actually seen him fight up until this point, so there's still a bit of mystery to the 4-beast Dragon Slayer abilities. Now, the guildmaster that precedes George is actually the Moon Dragon God Selene. And I go over a bit of her in the Dragon Gods Explained video, and Selene will get her own video at some point in the future, as there's a lot to talk about when it comes to Selene in general, as well as some of the other Dragon Slayers we end up meeting in Diablos. Before we get into some of the more important characters in Diablos, let's go over the rest of what's deemed Team Scullion, outside of Kyria, Madmal, and Scullion himself. We got Nabaru, who is the Clinging Dragon Slayer, who just says essentially cocoon all the time and has a just kind of creepy, and Wraith, the Soul Dragon Slayer, who has a very interesting ability with this, but also what's interesting is his past and how this plays into the arc where he's introduced. It adds to a really good fight and really, honestly, kind of sweet moment. Now, onwards to Diablos' essentially elite fighting force, the 4 strongest members of Diablos outside of the Guildmaster themselves, and that is the Dark Dragon Slayer Knights. Now, these characters are characters that we will end up fighting in the Labyrinth arc, and they end up being some pretty interesting and hard opponents to deal with for Fairy Tail, which leads to some really cool and interesting fights. And the first one we actually get to see an introduction for is Suzaku, who is the Sword Saint Dragon Slayer, and he is in fact the very first of the Dark Dragon Slayer Knights that we end up meeting. And as the name presides, he is a swordsman, a swords master, and that is primarily what his Dragon Slayer abilities are surrounded of. And like all members of the Black Dragon Knights, they have really cool aliases. And Suzaku's is the Vermilion Dragon. Now that is already incredibly cool for a code name. And it does incite fear as well as a type of presence that you don't want to mess with. The next of the Dragon Slayer Knights that we meet is Haku, who is the White Tiger Dragon Slayer. And he is literally just the alias, the White Tiger Dragon. Quite literally the same as his Dragon Slayer attribute. He can be kind of innocent and childish at times, but when he gets serious, he gets a bit mischievous and cocky, which ends up changing things up in the terms of how he fights. He even gets on all fours and acts like a tiger. Next up is type of the big sis One-chan of the group, who is Misaki, who is the Azure Dragon Slayer, and her alias is just the Azure Dragon. Relatively simple, but still a cool alias nonetheless. The interesting thing is that Kyria is actually her protege, somebody that she helps out and helps grow stronger whenever the time arises, so they have a bit of a sisterly bond, which is why I called her the big sis of the group. And when it comes to Kyria in particular, she can be kind of protective and shows no mercy to those that humiliate her precious protege. And the final member we'll be talking about for Diablos and the Dark Dragon Slayer Knights is actually Kirin, who is probably my second favorite of these because he has a really awesome fight against one of my favorite characters in Fairy Tail, lacks this. And he is actually the Yellow Dragon Slayer, with his alias being the either King of Lightning or the Yellow Dragon. His backstory and how he gained his powers is actually relatively intriguing, which, like the other Dragon Slayer Knights, they're all going to get warranted with their own particular video. Kieran, however, is a relatively prideful member of their whole group. He's confident in his strength and also wants to support Celine in her goals due to his relatively traumatic past to an extent, is all I'm going to say. Nonetheless, he's actually one of the cooler members of the Dark Dragon Knights, and this group is honestly very cool to look at. They have very cool fights and abilities, and I cannot wait to break them all down individually with their own individual videos. But that is essentially Diablos in a nutshell. They are a Dragon Slayer guild composed of 5th generation Dragon Slayers. They were created by George while he was taking the 100 Years Quest, and due to breaking the contract for 100 Years Quest, the guild was barred from ever legally participating in this quest. But due to them being a Dragon Slayer guild, it doesn't really stop them from looking into these things themselves and trying to hunt down the dragon gods and other dragons so they can gain their powers and also find more people to become Dragon Slayers. Diablos, while its history is relatively brief and not the most detailed out there, it is most definitely the most interesting guild in Fairy Tail that isn't a dark guild or Fairy Tail itself, which already makes it one of my personal favorites, especially with every member that we meet, barring maybe 2 of them, being really cool in their own regards, whether it be their personality or abilities. And their impact on the story individually as well as a whole was always fun to look forward to, as there was always something that Diablos would do to make the ongoing storyline a lot more interesting and add some extra conflict and spice to what we end up seeing in Fairy Tail. But that's essentially it. That's all you gotta know about Diablos at this moment. And expect some more videos about the wizard guilds of Fairy Tail in general down the road. I'm going to space these out whenever I get the time, because talking about the wizard guilds is actually something that I do want to talk about a lot more. But with all that being said, what did you guys think? Did you enjoy this video? Do you like Diablos and the concept of the creation and mission statement? Who's your favorite character in Diablos? What's your favorite ability in the Diablos guild for the Dragon Slayers? And would you yourself actually want to become a 5th generation Dragon Slayer by just eating dragon meat? Let me know in the comment section down below. And if you haven't already, like and subscribe and hit the notification bell for updates on future videos. Really helps and it shows you guys enjoy the content I make here on the channel and shows you want to see more. Look, as disgusting as it sounds, if the Lich-Sin dungeon has taught us anything, is that if cooked properly, dragon meat can taste incredible.